thank you very much for coming today to honor Brian Woodcock. Brian was a dedicated volunteer and steward of Camosun Bog and the Pacific Spirit Regional Park. He was a mentor, a teacher, and a friend to many people, as you can see from how many folks have come out today. And he was also a loving husband, father, and grandfather. It's very fitting that we're all gathered here because Brian used to play in this park as a child, and even though he would go on adventures to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro or Everest Base Camp, he came back here because this was home, and it's where he chose to dedicate a lot of his time later on in life. My name's Mike Jarowski, and like Brian, I'm a past president of the Pacific Spirit Park Society. I'd like to think, though, that my job was made all the easier because of just the amazing, loving community that he helped to build, and all of the programs that helped to protect and restore the park and the bog, and to educate students about the important wildlife and plants and people who this bog is so important to. Before I introduce folks, I just wanted to briefly kind of talk about my last memory with Brian. And that was last fall. I was out in Camosun Bog here, and I was gathering some video footage to create learning materials for kids as part of my research. And I was kind of looking through my field notes of the day, and while I had a lot of pieces of advice that Brian had given me while we were chatting, I thought that the take-home message was about the importance of community and environmental education. So very briefly, what Brian had talked to me about was that environmental education should not be confined to classrooms. Kids need to get muddy, they need to make friends, they need to participate in projects, and they need to make a connection with very special places like Camosun Bog, because that's what's going to forge a lifelong connection to nature for them. And I think Brian's work with the Camosun Bog Restoration Group is such an excellent example of this sort of philosophy. As a teacher and mentor, he's been instrumental to encouraging the next generation of environmental leaders in our community through volunteerism, and these students are already beginning to teach others, their peers. I met with his wife, Loretta, and she was sharing with me kind of Brian's approach to teaching. He had this uncanny ability to notice those who were truly exceptional and those who passion just drove their approach to making connections with nature, to teaching others about nature, and to restoring their environment. Mentorship was very important to him, and he would devote time above and beyond what was often seen in the kind of role that he had taken on. And for me, I think that this devotion is probably best illustrated by the fact that the day after he received his diagnosis, that he came into this bog and he gave one last eco-walk for some of the students from St. George's School. And I think that says a lot about the kind of man that Brian was and the impact that he had on his community. This event is being hosted by the Woodcock family and the Pacific Spirit Park Society, and I'd like to introduce you to his family. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hand. His wife, Loretta, who I'm sure you all know. Daughter, Alana, and her husband, Chad, and their children, Aria and Colton, are here. Joanne and Rob, and Sarah and her husband, Kevin, are joining us. His daughter, Nicole, and her husband, Andre, would like to send their best wishes from their home in South Africa, but they're not able to be here today. Brother Dave and his family send their best wishes from Lethbridge, Alberta. And we also have a set of grandparents here as well. Chad's mom and dad, Aria and Colton. Their names are Judy and Doug. Yeah. Oh, there's Judy right there. Okay. We have three speakers lined up to share their memories of Brian today. We have Lawrence Brown. He's a scientist and a longtime friend of Brian's who collaborated with him in the restoration of Camosun Bog. We also have Robin Worcester. She's the Natural Resources Manager at Metro Vancouver Regional Parks, and she's here speaking today as a longtime friend of Brian and Loretta. And we also have Janet Antonio. She's the executive director of the Metro Vancouver Regional Parks Foundation, and she will be doing the dedication of Brian's plaque that has been installed on the boardwalk out in Camosun Bog. After these three people have spoken, we'd also like to invite anyone in the audience who would like to come up and share some of their personal memories of Brian. But we also understand if you'd like to do that more privately among smaller groups of your friends and family. We have musicians Peter and Robin playing today. You've probably heard them in the background. And among other things, they'll be playing a Leonard Cohen piece. He was one of Brian's favorite lyricists. And after the presentation, just to give you an idea of how things are going to work, we'll share some memories here. Please make sure to sign the large card over there under the Metro Vancouver Regional Parks tent. And then you can go into the bog. Brian's plaque and bench is the first one on the left as you enter the bog, and there's a bit of orange flagging tape there, okay? The second one. Oh, the second one? Okay, the second one. And with that, I'd like to invite a friend of Brian's, Lawrence, to come up and say a few words.
I must say, I really am not a public speaker, and it's surprising that I'm here, but I'm probably the only person that knows Brian's entire involvement in the bog, and particularly his early involvement from 1996 to 2006. That's when he did most of his work. And I want to go back to 1996, and it's hard to believe it now, but the bog was in a really bad state. They had logged out 150 large hemlock trees, which opened up the area to sunshine. It was a nice wet surface with forest stuff on top, perfect conditions for birch trees to come in. So we were starting to get a birch forest. It was even worse, because work crews came in and cut the birch trees at their base. Well, nice deciduous trees, they formed side shoots, they coppiced. And so if every single tree had maybe 4 or 6 of these side shoots. So the area became a real jungle, and it was very hard to get into it even. And people at this point said, forget it, we're not going to be able to save Camosun Bog, it's just too late. So, not everybody believed that, and Brian moved into this area in 1996, and he was convinced that the bog could be saved. And he had a vision of a fully restored Camosun Bog. I was also interested in the bog, and so the two of us got together and formed the Camosun Bog Restoration Group. It was an interesting combination. Brian is a really outgoing, friendly person with this vision of a restored bog. People warmed to him, as you can see from all the friends today, and people enjoyed being around him. He was a good businessman, and so he was able to work on his vision and move it forward. And also, he was able to persuade people to help him. He had a background in marketing, and so he was really good for that. So the two of us got together. I'm very different from Brian, obviously, and I'm more of the scientist, and I like measuring things and analysing things and moving ahead slowly. And it was a very interesting combination, the scientist and the visionary working together, and we worked together very happily. And I think we provided one another different energies that made the project go much faster. So anyway, we had the bog, and we how to restore it. And of course, at this point in 1996, there was very little information in the literature. People in those days were not interested in bogs in general. And what do you do? We were very lucky that Hamish Kimmins from UBC Forestry, he gave us some very good advice, and he said you need to set up a test bog, and where you can look at different conditions like ground elevation, water coverage, plant distribution, and see if you can get conditions where you can get good restoration of the bog. We were very hesitant about this because we didn't really think it would work. So we did the project way off in the southwest corner of the bog, completely surrounded by these wretched birch trees. And the reason for this was that when the project didn't succeed, we could just walk away from it. Nobody would know what we were doing. So luckily we didn't have to walk away from it, and we were fairly successful. And we got the conditions right for restoration, which would apply to the entire bog. So then we had to start a really hard work. And this meant taking out these wretched birch trees, taking out stumps, lowering the ground. Typically about 15 centimeters of soil had to be taken off to get the right water table. So it was a lot of work. Brian focused on the on taking out the birch trees, and over 2 or 3 years he must have taken out several hundred of these things, and they were quite miserable to take out. So anyway, that was very successful in the end. Brian had a real vision of having a boardwalk around the bog, and he set up his Millennium Project to try to get this set up. This was really just a fundraising activity, actually. But he came up with a design for the boardwalk, which is really quite neat. You know, wandering into the bog and back out again, out into the forest and back out again. All very complicated and very nice. But he went to park management, and they were not happy. And so they said, you know, they wanted a simple loop round the bog to keep the cost of building and maintenance as low as possible. So Brian is very good at kind of negotiating things, and we were able to end up with some kind of boardwalk that we could both live with and wasn't going to be too expensive for them. So that was the layout of the bog, of the boardwalk. The next stage was getting money, and Brian was excellent at that. He would go to senior management in different companies and persuade them to contribute to this Millennium Project. And he got money from, and I probably don't have a complete list, but Van City, BC Hydro, Interfor, Royal Bank, and there's several others, I think. But he raised more than $30,000, which in those days was enough to build the boardwalk. So we had the design of the boardwalk, we had the money to build it, and during the fall and winter of 2005, it got built. And I still remember our celebration at the end, which was strictly staff that were building it and boggers, and we had our last spike party. This is the last nail going in for building our structure. However, the main celebration was on the 22nd of April 2006, and this was when Metro Vancouver had the official opening of the boardwalk. And this was truly a proud day for us. You know, we had got this really neat boardwalk. Lots of people were going around the bog, joggers and dog walkers and all sorts of people. Pretty well vandalism had gone. People weren't walking on the surface of the bog, so all in all, things were going really well. The restoration was slow, but we knew what we were doing from the test bog, and it was just a matter of doing a large amount of work. So at this point, Brian moved away from being really heavily involved in the project and took on an advisory role. And you know, he would come to all our planning meetings and things like that. We had a lot of discussions with the Musqueam Nation about signage. He was involved in the walkway that goes right round the bog up to the Camosun substation and the landfill. So he did a lot of other things, but basically more on advisory. And I certainly, you know, spent a lot of time talking with him about various ideas we had. I'll just one thing I noticed here, there was a sign showing that Brian was very good at jokes, and there's a few examples of his jokes on the signage there. I was going to give one example which isn't here and is my favourite, so I'm going to do that now. This is 10 years ago. Burgess had discovered a chestnut-backed warbler in the bog. this is apparently really rare and exciting to real birders. And they were coming up from California, well, not California, Oregon and Washington and all around BC, and really excited. Brian came, for whatever reason, and I have no idea how he got this, but he had a stuffed pheasant. How you have a stuffed pheasant, I have no idea. Anyway, he brought this stuffed pheasant into the bog quite surreptitiously, and just put it in where it was just visible and no more, and then walked out. So yeah, the birders were looking for their official chestnut-backed warbler, and one of them saw this pheasant. He got really excited. They're not seen in Vancouver. This is really, really rare. So that was fine. Then more birders came in and looked at it. And Brian simply walked into the bog, lifted up his pheasant, and walked back out again. He never said a word. And the poor birders realized it had been had, and then luckily started to laugh at it. So I'd say there's so many more examples we could give, and you can see them, some of them over under the tent. I think I'll leave that section. So Brian wasn't active in those days, but a couple of years ago he did start to get more interested, and came to a number of our work parties. His big thing then was taking out hemlock trees, and he also enjoyed giving tours of the bog. He was really good at doing giving tours. And the last time I saw him, and this kind of relates to what Mike was saying, he was feeling really good because he had led tours for UBC botany and for the St. George's students. And as he said, the St. George's students gave him not just one, but 2 rounds of applause. So it must have been a really good tour. Anyway, that was his last time in the bog. I phoned him about 3 days later, got no reply, and he was very good at answering phone calls. He was a real businessman. He would always answer the phone fairly quickly. And so I got a phone call from Loretta about 3 days later saying that he'd had this heart attack and was at VGH. And it was really hard to take. But you just have to accept these things happen, and so it is. But we still have a restored Camosun bog, which is Nature Boardwalk, to remember him. The fitting memorial to a very fine person. Thank you, Brian, for everything you've done. I really listen.
So, yeah, I first came to know Brian actually through Loretta, who was a Vancouver Park Board Commissioner when I worked at the Stanley Park Ecology Society. I got to collaborate with Loretta on some really great initiatives like International Migratory Bird Day, which turned into Bird Week with the City of Vancouver, and she was a huge support for the creation of the Stanley Park Ecological Action Plan, which instigated some important restoration initiatives in Stanley Park, including saving our tiny bog at Beaver Lake. She connected the crazy boggers with our team, so when I came to work here in 2015 as a biologist for Metro Vancouver Regional Parks, I had met Brian and knew all about his effort at Camosun Bog. I knew him as a kind and generous person who had a great interest in the future of the bog. He wanted to be in the loop about any planning activities or anything that had a bearing on the health of the bog or the boggers and their needs. From day one, it was clear to me that the bog was not just his backyard, right outside his house, but it was his pride and joy. The extraordinary product of 25 years of hard-fought restoration effort. A labor of love for such a unique and important part of our community that he helped from being lost forever. I'm glad that he felt that he trusted it was in good hands and that things were all functioning and moving well in the right direction. But that wasn't always the case. As I heard from Richard Wallace, who's been the operations supervisor here at Pacific Spirit Regional Park for the last 20 years. In the early days of saving the bog, the community not only faced a massive restoration challenge, but also a highly contentious one. The bog restoration project was a difficult issue, and Metro Vancouver Regional Parks, the Pacific Park Society, and the community did not always see eye to eye on how to move the project forward. Not only were there different organizations and values to contend with, but also many super passionate, knowledgeable, and opinionated people who all knew what was best for the bog. Brian was a lightning rod, a master of bringing people together. He was a force for collaboration, instrumental in wrangling all these disparate people and groups together. He inspired people to join forces, to find common ground, and he helped lead them towards that common goal. The bog restoration was a massive undertaking, as Lawrence described, and after finding the path forward came huge amounts of work and time to accomplish the important labor of undoing the damage that Vancouver settlers had caused. Removing the giant stump and the massive roots by hand, digging out the organic soil, and transplanting thousands of moss plugs. It was 25 years of persistent, relentless attention to this small but indispensable marvel of nature by these folks and other volunteers who are even just starting right now. Brian became the voice of the bog. His calm but compelling energy inspired people to care about the ecological, cultural, and spiritual value of the bog, and he drove them to act. I also care deeply about the bog. I've known for a long time that it was special and unique and important, but what Brian and others like Jerry and Lawrence have taught me is that it's more than just that. It's a product of community collaboration, labor, and perseverance. It's a real-life demonstration of Margaret Mead's well-known quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." These boggers have changed the world. They've saved a 10,000-year-old plant community from being lost forever, and in the process, they built a lasting community of people who care for it. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Loretta.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. So, first of all, thank you to everyone for being here today. I'm the Executive Director of the Metro Vancouver Regional Parks Foundation, formerly known as Pacific Parklands Foundation. And we raise funds specifically for regional parks to connect people with nature and to protect nature as well. And Loretta has asked me to say a few words to dedicate the bench that's in the bog here. So, to begin with, I would like to recognize the generosity of Dennis Underhill's family for their willingness to share their bench, their father's bench, with the legendary boggers. I work with a lot of people who are creating memorials for their families, and I think the fact that you're willing to share is a strong testimony to the friendship and the depth of the relationship that you've all had. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. I also know that many of you have donated to the fund as well, the Legendary Crazy Bogger Fund, and wanted to say thank you for that. In addition to the bench, it's also going to support projects in the parks that are inspired by Brian. So I know that that means a lot to the family, so thank you. Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet Brian, but having a chance to talk to Loretta and reading about his life and seeing all of the people here, it was clear that he was a visionary, he was a scholar, a community leader, and it is Loretta's hope that with this bench that his values will continue to inspire others. So one of the things that Loretta shared with me was that Brian grew up loving this area and playing in the woods. And although he traveled all over the world, this is the place he loved the most. And it's what always drew him back. And it was extremely important to him that the next generation also had a connection to this place and also had a connection to the natural world and knew that they had a role in preserving and helping the world we live in. And as has been mentioned, even right after his diagnosis, he pushed himself to give that last tour to that school group because that was such a strong value that he held in his heart. And it's also a place that he came for peace and comfort. And it was his vision that this place remain that for other people as well. So Loretta has asked to emphasize how important it was that this bench become a place for his grandchildren to visit and to learn about their grandfather. And I know that this is also going to be a place for other people to come and visit this bench. Perhaps you will bring your children or your grandchildren, and they will learn from some of what Brian lived his life. So it is our hope that his children, his grandchildren, and other children will sit on this bench and look at this bog, and they will see it as he saw it, a place of endless wonder and mysteries and great natural beauty. And as they sit on the bench, they will know that this was a man who forged great and lasting friendships, a visionary who inspired a community of people to come together and make the impossible possible. Resting on this bench, they will hear his voice in the singing of the birds, the laughter of children, and the whisper of the wind in the trees. Sitting on this bench, they can pause from the chaos of their lives, take a deep breath, and fill themselves with the peace of the forest, just as he did. And looking out at the boardwalk, they will see the legacy of a man who forged his own path and built a trail for others to follow. And as they walk that path, they will not be alone. Brian will be with them. And so thank you for everyone who is here today to gather and dedicate this bench and celebrate the life of a man who inspired so many and has created a legacy for the plants, animals, and people who call this place home. Thank you.
It's really great to be here. My name is Rick Careless. I have known Brian for over 30 years, Brian and Loretta. I am the ED of BC Spaces for Nature, which has preserved a lot of wilderness in this province. And Brian and Loretta came onto the board of BC Spaces in 1993, just as we were completing the effort to preserve the Tatsumshinni wilderness. So I have known Brian for a long, long time. We've been through an awful lot of campaigns together. Sometimes the situations were very, very trying, very, very difficult. For me, I encountered a lot of very high stress, and Brian was absolutely fundamental to being a rock for me in a very difficult time. He always had a perspective, a groundedness. It came out of his Buddhist aspect of him that is so important to him. That's why he spent so much time in Tibet. We went to Tibet and went in some of the special places that Brian had recommended with the people who were special to him. So being in Tibet, Brian was with us. Brian, during his time at BC Spaces, we did a lot of different things, but there's a couple of things that Brian was particularly involved with. We ran a wilderness education program which brought kids into the parks from Vancouver. And Brian was the one who worked with me to enable us to deliver it through Metro Van Parks, and we did that for a number of years. And we did stuff with then the Pacific Parklands Foundation, as I recall. One thing I would say is we're talking about Camosun Bog, but it should be understood that Brian and Loretta also played a very fundamental role at a very crucial point in helping us put Burns Bog over the top. So you are here today knowing Brian predominantly as a friend and somebody who's worked on Camosun Bog, who has passed on this piece of heritage right in the center of Vancouver. I want you to know that he was linked to something as well at the provincial level, and we did projects which were of international significance. I'm going to miss him. He's a solid friend. As I say, he helped me at some very difficult times, and Loretta and Brian, you were always such a combination, so solid right from the beginning. And Lana and your family, I'm just so glad to be able to be here with you. You had a very, very special father. Thank you.
I'm Rick Hankin. I was manager of regional parks at GVRD for 25 years. Basically the best job in the whole lower mainland, and it paid a decent salary too. Some say indecent for my skill level, but nevertheless. I'm here in two capacities. I want to give a little bit of history about how all this happened. Most of the comments have referred to about the time Brian got involved, but there was a significant history that made what was happened with Brian possible, predating that time. Myself, as manager, I wasn't in the front lines like staff here at Pacific Spirit and in West Area Parks. So I met Brian maybe 10 times over the years before I retired in 2003. And he brought a new face, a new style to developing a working relationship. It was very open. And I'll use Mitch Sokolsky's comments. He couldn't be here today because he was somewhere in Ontario on a 6-week road trip to Newfoundland and back by car. So he wasn't going to make it. But he was area manager here for West Area Parks, headquartered at Pacific Spirit. Sorry to hear about Brian. He was a remarkable person in many ways. Not only did he have a great deal of patience working with young people, he had even greater patience working with regional district staff. Myself included. I remember the first time I met Brian and Loretta, they called me out of the blue and asked for a meeting. As we met, I learned about the couple's great passion for engaging in positive environmental action in Pacific Spirit and the couple's great passion for Camosun Bog. Brian and his friend Lawrence Brown and Dennis Underhill, along with many others, worked tirelessly for many years undertaking bog restoration activities. For me, the proof of their dedication was their dedicated effort was the gradual transformation of regrowth both in sphagnum and sundew. It was truly amazing to see. Brian should also be remembered as a teacher. One of the things he taught me was the importance of listening to others with an open mind. He taught me that perception becomes reality to many. I won't forget that. It's an important life lesson and helps me understand or appreciate the importance of different points of view. The breadth of that perspective that's reflected in those comments is what helps put Brian's role here in perspective. I'm going to just comment on a bit of history that leads up to the time of Brian's involvement. One was the logging of 120 trees here in 1991. At that time, a park organization could be crucified for suggesting cutting a tree. But by that time, we'd had 15 years of collaboration with many of the people here and other citizens fighting to save the endowment lands. And in the early 80s, we held several special events here in which we ran shuttle buses, displays, nature walks, had music, all when it was not parkland. But we were determined, and when I say we, I mean the citizens as well as park staff, to have this treated as a park even though it wasn't, and to build a reality in place. That happened with Bill van der Zam's decision in 1989 that all but 1.5 acres of the forest would become regional park, along with the acquisition of Wreck Beach at the same time, which offered, of course, an interesting management challenge. The logging was a fact, though, that it became, here we were taking 120 trees, a helicopter right over here, going up to the old landfill off Discovery that was helping enrich the waters and destroy the bog. And while it was a challenge, here we were flying a helicopter within 100 yards of many homes, and yet there were no words of opposition. And that was because we had 15 years of working together. And it was a credit to everybody involved. Doesn't mean everybody agreed on everything all the time, but it happened. And people like Bert Brink, those of you who remember him, he was a tremendous mentor, and he would tell me about the fact pollutants from the pulp mills on Vancouver Island were actually helping to enrich the bog and therefore destroy it, along with the drying out in the forest. So that logging took place, and it almost had a festival feel to it. That's something I'm personally, and I think a lot of others, were very proud of. It wasn't obviously the solution we hoped for, but if you can imagine today, had those trees not been taken out, we would not be talking about a bog. It would be gone and very difficult to replace. The second thing I wanted to talk about was a bit the crazy boggers. They were formed, yes, in the mid-90s, but many of those people, Lawrence and others that have been mentioned, were part of collaboration. And I bridle a little bit at the frequent use of the word volunteer, because the people involved here were so much more. I have been associated with an organization not long ago where the volunteer coordinator considered it their job to recruit volunteers to help do things that agency wanted, when they wanted, and how they wanted. We never had such a compliant group of people that they would accept that, but it's so much more, and I like the word partner so much better, because partnerships are not always peaceful, but partnerships can be productive when they hammer out the differences and agree on some priorities. So when it came to the bog restoration, one of the merits I've always tried to argue, for God's sakes, the volunteers you're dealing with are intelligent, experienced, often have skill sets you don't. And the idea of volunteers that will simply, more or less in the most extreme case, follow orders inhibits innovation, it inhibits mobility, and it inhibits the ability to take on new challenges nobody's ever thought of. So I had to laugh when Mitch told me, you know, we've spent 15 years, we've spent money on engineers, we had a UBC technical committee, and we were all dedicated to how do we raise the water table in the bog, less than a foot. How did we do that? And there was no solution. And he came in one day and told me they're going to take the bog down to meet the water if you can't bring the water up to the table. That may sound simplistic, but then they embarked, as has already been described by Lawrence, on a number of test plots and so on. But it came from the community, and while I'm a planner by background, I don't believe creativity and innovation happens in a planned fashion. It happens because of chemistry, because of cyclic encounters, achievements, and allows you to do something. So the second point I wanted to make was the Crazy Boggers are perhaps the best example of a partnership group. They talked today about all the things they were doing, sometimes with arguments with staff, but as an entity of their own, not just as volunteers subscribing to a volunteer program. To me, that kind of sociology was part of here and part of the formation of the Pacific Spirit Park Society, and one that I know a lot of us take pride in, and I do. And Brian came along just as we were getting that organization going. It was one of the first pilot projects in 1996, where we were trying this new approach. We did not want volunteer coordinators, we wanted partners. We didn't need to hold people's hands when they were just as intelligent, just as skilled, and just as ready and motivated to act. So Brian, when I came across him the few times I did, it was a different perspective he brought. It was a collaborative one. It was one about developing understanding and patience. And you've heard today how broadly that was adopted and felt by a lot of other people. And I can't speak on behalf of GVRD Parks anymore, Metro Vancouver Parks anymore, but I can speak in my own behalf and those of the staff who were involved here, that this was an exciting, living experiment in collaboration between community and agency, and one we all treasured, and Brian played a key role in making that really work here. So thank you, Brian, and I express my regrets at his loss, and I know you all feel the same way, but he did contribute a lot in his time here, and we're all better for it. Thank you very much.